Okay, good morning. Yes, I've unmuted myself. Good morning, and I have pressed record already. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today for Peter's dissertation defense. We have all the committee members here. Welcome, and welcome to the guests as well. And I'll just hand over to Peter to get started. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Taiwo, and my dissertation advisor is Dr. Aline Rhodes. You're welcome to this dissertation presentation. The title of my dissertation is Blind Adaptive Beamforming for Multi-User MIMO Systems with Channel Estimation for Millimeter Wave Communications. This is my outline. I'm going to start with an introduction, which consists of the background, literature review, and I'm going to state the motivation and problem statement. Then I'll be describing channel models for millimeter wave communications, blind channel estimation, and adaptive equalization for multiple access systems. Then I'll describe the design of the adaptive beamformer for multi-user millimeter wave communication, the zero forcing precoder for downlink communication, and the adaptive hybrid beamforming. Then I'll state my conclusions and propose future work. Starting with the background, millimeter wave spectrum covers frequencies from 30 to 300 gigahertz and is useful for high-speed line-of-sight communications. With millimeter wave, we can achieve more directionality than the microwave frequencies. And it provides us also a lot of opportunities for indoor wireless application where we can have multiple users that are spatially separated communicated to. And we achieve this by using phase array antennas to perform beam steering on the downlink communication to multiple users or devices. So we look at the wireless gigabit alliance standard for 802.11ay, 802.11ad Wi-Fi standards. And this specifies 60 gigahertz millimeter wave band with a 9 gigahertz bandwidth. The physical layer is allocated from 57.05 to 64 gigahertz. This may vary based on the region or country. So this one is for the US and Canada. So we should note that for a single carrier physical layer system, we employ the BPSK, QPSK system QAM with symbol rate of 1.76 gigahertz symbol per second. One of the benefits of using the single carrier option is that it minimizes power consumption for low battery devices. Now I want to go through my literature review. And on millimeter wave channel characterization and beam steering, the work that are centered on this area, I'll start with Rappaport, who gave an insight into millimeter wave communication for 5G networks by using steerable antennas. So he conducted, with other researchers, he conducted an experiment, several set of experiments, and it was found that every attenuation at millimeter wave is only 1.4 dB at 28 gigahertz, and high penetration losses due to building is 28 to 40 dB. For the indoor materials have only penetration losses between 3 to 6.8 dB. For the signal processing, Said and Heat proposed the option for signals transmitted over millimeter wave channels using the 1D array, which consists of n elements ULA, which is the uniform linear array. And so this provides steering vector, which is defined as stated here on the slide. Also, Neil, Jonet, and Akid proposed concept to increase the communication distance and data rates at military frequencies using intelligent communication environments, which is enabled by ultramassive MIMO platforms. More on the signal processing method for millimeter wave. Channel estimation is done using non-blind means, like non-blind techniques, such as the MMSC. And we note here that using the non-blind means, such as the MMSC, requires a training sequence. And if we consider the fact that in millimeter wave, we're going to be using large number of antenna array elements, this is going to add up to a lot of payload. And now I want to point out the work done by Taiwo and Koros, which introduced blind adaptive means for doing this, which require no training signals, which is obtainable with the non-blind channel estimation technique. And blind CMA system also was adopted, and block processing and FFT fast Fourier transform was also used to move towards a real-time possibility in the application. Blind equalization actually started with Johnson, who came up with a blind equalizer using gradient descent algorithm. And this is useful for modulation scheme that has a single radial modulus, but O, Ching, and Yang later provided an extension from the CMA to a multi-modulus algorithm. Barbarossa and Scarcity-Brown introduced the AMA cost function which, to equalize QAM signal after initializing the equalizer by the CMA algorithm. And Beasley and Cole modified the CMA by combining both the CMA and AMA to provide a joint cost function, which had to force the equalizer output to belong to a signal constellation of interest. And this lowers the inter-symbol interference and improve convergence rate over using just CMA equalizer only. Mozambique and Cole applied substitution techniques, which allowed us to use the CMA AMA for a MIMO system. Now I'll go to the motivation and problem statement. So we consider a millimeter wave indoor application, which includes smart home systems, IoT devices, wireless access at airport lounges and waiting room, virtual reality booths and casinos. And also we consider an indoor sensor network that uses a multi-user indoor sensor, which is a multi-user indoor sensor network that beams signal directly to each sensor in order to do control, monitoring, sensor data analytics, and sensor location services. We can also consider a mix of these networks, which is a mixed multi-user network. And here we have both the sensor devices in the network, data users also with PC tablets and cell phones with minimum mobility, since we are considering the indoor. Now let's look at what the mobility issues are for the indoor. Generally, in a communication system where mobility is significant, the Doppler effect will increase as the barrier frequency increases. So for the indoor, where we have a typical motion of 1 meters per second, the Doppler frequency is 200 plus or minus 200 hertz, compared to the idle, where we can have very high speed like that of a bullet train and airplane. The Doppler we'll be considering there will be about plus or minus 10 kilohertz. If you come back to the indoor scenario, the channel coherence time at plus or minus 200 hertz is the Doppler. The Doppler for plus or minus 200 hertz is about the channel coherence time for the indoor is about 5 milliseconds. So for an achievable symbol rate of 1.76, which is obtainable when we consider the 802.11 AD standard and using the system QAM, which is a 4-bit per symbol modulation scheme with a single carrier, the symbol period is 0.57 nanoseconds. So for a packet of 1400 symbols, which we are going to be using typically in our experiments, the packet duration is computed to be 0.8 milliseconds. So if you look at this, we see that the packet duration time is much less than the channel coherence time. So therefore, the Doppler effect is negligible for this indoor environment. So this is my problem statement, and that is to develop and evaluate a millimeter wave beamforming communication system for an indoor wireless environment with multiple users using the blind adaptive channel destination and signal recovery. These are my objectives, and that is to develop an appropriate model for the millimeter wave channel for the indoor, and also apply a blind adaptive scheme which provides signal separation and signal recovery for multiple users. Then we develop the downlink precoder by using the channel estimates, which is acquired during the blind adaptive scheme. Then we evaluate the performance of the beamforming system and provide bounds on performance. So next, we want to look at channel models for millimeter wave communication. So as a way to describe the millimeter wave channel, the millimeter wave channel is characterized by a dominant line of sight path. It is also possible that we have a blockade in the line of sight path, and the receiver receives a strong reflection from another part, which is stronger than the other multipath. In this case, the receiver will sense that strong reflection as the dominant line of sight path. But when there is a situation whereby both the line of sight path is blocked and there is no strongly reflected path, then the characteristics of the channel degenerates to that of a really fading model, which is typically the model for microwave channels. The millimeter wave channel also suffer transmission losses, which are due to path loss, which is as a result of the distance between the transmitter and the receiver. Shadowing due to obstruction, multipath, which result in symbol interference. Also, there is the non-line of sight scattering, which we're going to describe by the Rayleigh distribution. And we should also note that the resolved part in millimeter wave actually consists of a superposition of scattering clusters with limited angular spread. So this is the Rayleigh fading model. So the Rayleigh fading model and also the Raishan fading model are actually used to generate the millimeter wave channel according to the sinusoid model described by Zhao, Zheng, and Bellew. So for the Rayleigh part, the Rayleigh fading model, the model is expressed here, which puts into consideration the Doppler frequency, the angle of arrival and initial phase on the path. So the two angles of arrival and initial phase are uniformly distributed over minus pi and pi, and they are mutually independent. And this, we have to also consider that this is aggregated over all the propagation paths that is getting to the receiver. Now for the Raishan feeding model, where we have a strong line of sight component. So we see here that the Raishan feeding model has the Rayleigh distribution as its subset, and the other part of the model here belongs to that of the line of sight. And the relationship between the two of them is defined by the ratio of the specular power of that of the line of sight to the non-line of sight, which is the Raishan factor or the A factor. This is computed by using the square of the mean of both the real and the imaginary parts of the channel gain over twice the common variance. Now let's consider how the channel will change when we bring in a uniform linear array antenna. So the channel is highly determined by the antenna structure and the number of multiparts as well. The uniform linear array, which we are going to be focusing on in this work, provides a single directional beam steering axis. So we have other kind of antenna array, which is uniform planar array, which can also have different geometric form, like the uniform rectangular planar array, hexagonal planar array, and the circular planar array. All these also affect how the channel model will change. So we also note that when phase shifters are applied to the signals transmitted on this phase array antenna, we can manipulate the beam direction of the signal that we are transmitting. So examine each of the components that are used for the array antennas. At millimeter wave, antenna aperture is much smaller than what we have for the microwave. So of course, the disadvantage of that is that we are going to be receiving much smaller power. But because of the miniature components of the antenna, we can pack several antennas together, which increases the power as well as giving us opportunity to steer the signal we're trying to transmit. So as stated earlier, so we have different form of array, the UPA and the ULA. We're going to be focusing on the ULA. So if you look at the ULA, so we have all these antenna components packed together, and when all the signals are transmitted through these components are varied in phase, and the variation is responsible for the steering of the beam to the direction that we desire. So for the ULA, let's imagine incident signal on the ULA antenna. So it's going to be incident on the ULA antenna at an angle of pi prime here, and we can compute the electrical angle using this expression 2d over the lambda, the wavelength, by sine theta. And from there, we can compose our steering vector, with which we can steer the signal beam based on the theta we employ here, which is going to correspond to either the incident angle of the signal or the projected angle of the signal. So the multi-part channel with n elements ULA for single user millimeter wave communication is modeled as follows. And this is modeled for k ranging from 0 to k minus 1, where this k is the number of channel taps. So on each tap, so we should note also that on each tap we have different steering angles. Now, all of each of the parts coming to the receiver or transmitted from the transmitter actually have their own transmit angle, the angle of arrival or the angle of departure, depending on whether we are considering transmit or receive. So also we should note the complex gain of the channel. So talking about the complex gain of the channel, this follows a Gaussian distribution of 0 mean and the particular variance. So on the LOS, which has the variance of when k equals to 0, we have a relationship between the LOS part and the non-LOS part. So this relationship between the Gaussian distribution of both parts are related based on the power delay profile. And the power delay profile typically puts the power of the non-line of sight to be that of 10 dB, minus 10 dB to minus 5 dB of the line of sight part. And the angle of arrival on the non-line of sight part follows the uniform distribution between minus half pi and half pi. Previous work has focused on single user MIMO system with co-located multiple antenna at the transmitter and receiver over microwave frequency. And to mitigate against the inter-symbol interference and noise, we apply the adaptive equalizer, a multi-stage equalizer in case of a scenario where we are dealing with multiple users. But our current work now focuses on non-co-located multiple users transmit over MIMO channel, millimeter wave MIMO channel, with a ULA antenna at the receiver. So this work is further extended to a downlink beamformer for pre-coding for signal that are downlink, that are supposed to go downlink to a target user. So in this section, I want to describe the blind channel estimation and adaptive equalization, which is the basis of our adaptive beamformer. Signal equalization is performed using known higher order statistics with a blind adaptive equalizer. So to efficiently equalize QAM signal, we combine CMA, constant modulus algorithm, with AMA. And we use a joint cost function, which is a linear combination of the cost function of the CMA and that of the AMA. And this is the expression for the cost function of the CMA, and that's for the AMA. So we start our equalizer weight using center tap initialization, and then we iteratively update the equalizer using this expression, which uses a gradient of the cost function of the joint CMA, AMA. So this is the gradient of the cost function of the joint EME, and CME is actually a linear combination of the gradient of the CME cost function and that of the EME, the gradient of the EME cost function. So this is the expression for the gradient of the cost functions, and we notice here that it involves the topic matrix of the received signal. So for multiple users, so we have our equalizer block now not just being a matrix but a tensor because of the multipath that is involved. Now we're looking at a case where I have multiple users also transmitting on a multipath channel. So in this, for this reason, we're going to need a special character, which is the matrix operator, which we define as written here on the slide. And also for computational efficiency, we apply the fast Fourier transform to compute our final output for each user, which is also written as the IFFT of the FFT of the equalizer and that of the received signal over the number of antenna elements we are considering. So we use this similar approach, which to also compute the gradients of the CME cost function. So we use the FFT also to process the gradients of the CME cost function with this expression, and this special term here, E and D, also are given as follows. So once we get the final weight of our equalizer, we can use that to estimate the channel. And we should remember we are doing a multi-stage process based on the number of users we are considering. So that means at each stage, we do the recovery of the signal and also the estimates of the channel that is particular to that user that is being recovered at that stage. So we use the final weight and the autocorrelation function, RXS, here to compute the estimate of the channel, which is zero padded here, but after this, we can remove the zero pad to get the estimate of the actual channel based on the number of taps on the real channel. So at each stage of our multi-stage equalizer, we are able to recover the next signal by making sure that whatever signal we recover at a particular stage, we remove the contribution of that signal from the received signal, the signal received at the ULA. So we do this by, building a function that does the signal cancellation, which is represented by the expression right here, which is the estimate of the channel, with the received signal. So at the first stage, the received signal is the actual signal received on the ULA, and at the second stage, it's going to be a modified received signal that goes to the multi-stage equalizer to recover the next user signal. So the experiment we conduct here, we transmit a signal block from multiple user over a really faded channel to a base station EQ with co-located antennas. Now at this point, it's not a ULA. So we want to visualize how we get our separated equalized signal and also the channel estimate. And these are the parameters used. And this is done with 1,000 number of iteration. Here we have the number of users being 3. And again, we also vary the SNR in order to be able to evaluate the performance of our system over varying number of the transmit signal to noise ratio. Here we see the illustration of how the signal goes to the channel and mixed up with some other signals also coming from other parts. And the equalizer recovered the first signal, and with the first signal and the final weight of the equalizer, we're able to estimate the channel. And then we can remove the contribution of this first signal with the estimated channel. So using the estimated channel and the received signal, we can remove the contribution of this first recovered signal from the input signal received at the ULA, at the antennas. Then the next stage of the MISO equalizer has an input of that modified input signal. So when we vary the SNR in order to examine the performance of the equalizer with the Rayleigh model, so we found that as expected, equalized cases, average SCR and MSC improve with increasing SNR, but the last user has much better SCR. The SCR is much lower than other users. And we also noticed that even though the equalized cases are increasing, we did not actually get all the 800 Monte Carlo runs that were done recovered. In the second experiment, we decided to vary the number of antennas and see how that will affect the performance of the equalizer. When that is done, so we found out that the cases which we call the working cases, which is a case whereby all the user signals are recovered, increases with increasing number of antennas until we get to 10. Between 4 and 9, as we progress in increasing the number of antennas, the number of working cases also increases. We also notice that the SCR also increases up to when the antenna is 7, and then starts to drop after 7 number of antenna elements. So now we discussed the design of our adaptive digital beamformer for multi-user millimeter wave communication system. So we consider a beamformer system for multiple users. The base station uses blind adaptive algorithm to process the received signal, and we use the ULA. And we should note that here we're considering a digital beamformer where the number of ULA antenna is equal to the number of RF chains involved. So the channel equation now for just the LOS parts changes, and now it considers a steering matrix here with the matrix of the channel gain. So we should note that each column of this steering matrix is the steering vector for each user. The first column has the steering vector user 1 up to user Q. Q means the number of users we are considering. And for a multi-tap channel, so what changes is that for each part or for each tap, we have a channel matrix or the steering matrix, because the steering on each tap is different from one to the other. So we have different steering matrix, different steering angles involved or at each channel tap. So the equalized at the beamformer, equalization is done for a single stage equalizer. We have the W, which is the equalizer weight by the signal received at the ULA. And for a multi-stage equalizer, which involves multiple user. So this is the expression for that, which involves convolution as well, because we're dealing with multi-tap. And also our equalizer block is also a tensor, and we still use our defined matrix operator here to get the output signals. Now for the ULA, the effective channel as seen from the digital beamformer is expressed as this, and actually it is what it's doing on each part is estimating the channel matrix with the channel gain. So this makes it different from when we are considering a non-ULA antenna. So in the third experiment, so we now use a right-hand channel, and we have a single user transmitting signal block over the right-hand channel to a base station equipped with ULA. And these are the parameters we use for this experiment. And we should note that in this experiment, we are varying the number of channel taps to see how this affects our beamformer performance. So the number of channel taps is varied from 1 to 8. And we observe that SR increases with increasing number of channel taps, and the MSC stays fairly flat with a slight increase. And this can be attributed to the inter-symbol interference that increases as we increase the number of channel taps. In this experiment, in experiment 4, we transmit signal blocks from 2 users, because now we want to see how close can 2 users be before our beamformer starts to fail to separate and recover their signals. So we vary the angle of the difference between the angle of arrival between 2 users are varied from 0 to 1 radian. And we perform this experiment at SNR of 10 dB. And these are the results. And I have a scale here that shows all the corresponding values between radius and degrees. And if we notice from the number of equalized cases, at 10 to the power of -2 radian, we see a sharp decline in the number of equalized cases, and as well as the SCR also starts to increase sharply, starting from 10 to the -2 radian to 0. So what this tells us is that when 2 users has an angle of 0.5 degree space between them, that's when we start to see failure in our recovery process. And if we consider it 0.5 degrees, much less than 1 degree, so those users must be very, very, very close to each other. So in experiment 5, we also try to see what the performance of the beamformer would be if we increase the number of users. So we start with 1 user, a single user, to 8. And the result shows us that between 1 to 3 users, we have 100% equalized cases. And when we increase to 4 users, it drops to about 75%. And actually, between 1 to 3 users, we have a SCR of 0. By the time we get to 6 users, we have a lot of non-equalized cases. In experiment 6, we vary the SNR of transmit signal and compare the performance of our beamformer with a single tap channel versus a multi-tap channel. And what we observe is that SCR is 0 above 10 dB and above for both cases, while the multi-tap channel has much lower SCR than the single tap channel. So the mean square error, which we use to evaluate how good our channel estimate is, did not change significantly with increasing SNRs. And the multi-tap channel shows a slightly higher MSC than the single tap channel. In the 7th experiment that we conducted, so we vary the number of antennas between 10 and 100, and we compare single tap versus multi-tap for a right channel, which is the millimeter wave channel, using a ULA, N element ULA. And we also observe that there's an increase with increasing number of antennas, and MSC is observed to be fairly constant, especially when we start to get to 60 antennas to 100. Experiment 8 compares the single tap channel versus a multi-tap channel. Now we are considering multiple users, and we vary the SNR. So when we have multiple users and varying the SNR, we see that the SCR is of about 10 to minus 3, and that is achieved at around 13 dB for a single tap channel. So what we are actually doing comparison between the single tap channel and the multi-tap channel. So for the single tap channel, the SCR is around 10 to the minus 3, 13 dB, and the mean square error is about 10 to minus 3 over the entire range of SNR. So it's below 10 to the minus 3. So at SNR of 15 dB and higher, we have 100% working cases. That is the case where all users are equalized. So this is going to be significant when we compare with the multi-tap channel, which we'll see in the next slide. So for a 4-tap channel, so we have similar results between the SCR and the MSC, and we found that we have 100% working cases, that we've got all our users equalized at much lower dB than that of the single tap, which is 10 dB here. So now next I want to discuss the zero forcing implementation for downlink communication. So we use a zero forcing precoder. We consider signal blocks of data coming from multiple users, and for each user we already estimated the channel in our adaptive algorithm. So what we want to do is to be able to beam signal to each user using a precoder, such that only the user that is targeted receives a signal, while transmission is null to other users. So this is achieved by beam steering. So the multi-user zero forcing precoder is actually the pseudo inverse of the effective LOS channel. That is the channel as observed from the beamformer. So we should note that each column of the precoder matrix is actually a precoding vector for that user. So for the first column, the precoding vector here actually is meant for the first user. And when we consider what is received by the user, so we see that we use a precoder with the signal that's meant to be transmitted to the user and pass it over the LOS channel. So the pseudo inverse of the LOS channel is used for our precoder. The performance of the precoder is evaluated using the spectral efficiency, and it should be noted that there is an interference term in the SINR, which is used to compute the spectral efficiency. So what the zero forcing precoder achieves is to make sure that for this term that's not for the user that is targeted, this is null, and thereby suppressing the effect of interference. So due to the constraint that was mentioned earlier, that when the number of antennas starts to grow up to a massive MIMO system, for instance, we have there's a physical challenge of being able to also have the same number of RF chain. So therefore, we extend our system to a hybrid beamformer, where we use a much less number of RF chain as compared to the number of antenna elements on the ULA. So we have an extra block, which is the analog beamformer, which has an interconnection matrix that does in the uplink, it does lowering the resolution of the received signal at the ULA to what's actually received by the digital beamformer. So the analog interconnection matrix mentioned in the other side can be properly defined when we decide on which hybrid architecture we're using. So our hybrid architecture can either be fully connected hybrid beamformer architecture or a sub-connected hybrid beamformer architecture. So for a fully connected hybrid architecture, which is described here, so each RF chain is connected to all the elements on the ULA. It's connected to all the phase shifters that connect to all the elements on the ULA. So in this case, the analog, the matrix describing this will have all of them to be non-zero values. But for the sub-connected hybrid beamformer, which is also referred to as a one-stream per RF chain architecture, we have each RF chain connected to a disjoint antenna subarray, and the size of the antenna of each subarray is defined by NS, by a specific number. So in this case, the interconnection matrix is going to have non-zero values where we have a subarray, and it to be zero value for the rest of them. as we examine this interconnection for each RF chain, because not all the antenna array elements are connected to all the RF chains. So the channel, the effective channel as it relates to the actual channel now changes because the interconnection matrix now is introduced. And as stated earlier, this is defined depending on which architecture we're using. Either we're using the fully connected hybrid architecture or the partially connected hybrid architecture. So for our experiment here in this work, we use the partially connected hybrid architecture. So the hybrid beamformer targets the downlink LOS part, just like the digital beamformer, and the received signal by the user is expressed as this. And we can notice that difference between this expression here for the hybrid as compared to that of digital is that the precoder changes, and it's now comprised of the digital precoder and also the sub-array analog steering. And this is different for each user. And they are, the chronicle product is used between the two precoders, because the essence of this is to repeat the signal across all the antenna sub-array elements for each user. So for each user, the sub-array analog steering is defined as this, and the analog steering angle, which is theta half, is extrapolated from the estimated digital steering that's computed from the digital beamformer. So the analog part of the hybrid can use this to either fine-tune the angle of departure for each user, or even it can also be adaptively adjusted to update the channel for the user in question, or for the target user. So these are the experiment we conducted for the hybrid architecture. So we compare the performance of the downlink precoder between 100 elements ULE, digital, and hybrid architecture over varying SNR. And we should note here that the number of antenna elements used in this experiment, the ULE size is 100, and the number of RF chain is 20. So the number of each NSD sub-array element is 5. And here are the results. So we notice that we have working cases whereby all signal equalize for the digital beamformer be 100%, and that of the hybrid beamformer is as a case where all of the users' signal are equalized to be around 6% at low dBs. But as the SNR increases to a higher dB level, we have a constant performance of just 3% less than what we have for the digital beamformer. We also examined the SCR and the MSC between the digital beamformer and the hybrid beamformer for this experiment, and we see that the SCR for the hybrid beamformer actually starts to even reduce far more than that of digital at dB levels that's higher than 10. And the spectral efficiency in order to evaluate the performance of the downlink precoder for the hybrid architecture. So we compare the spectral efficiency between the hybrid and the digital beamformer, and we can observe that at lower dBs, the spectral efficiency for the digital beamformer approaches that of the optimal curve. So the optimal curve being a situation whereby we have a perfect channel state information, so we know the channel 100%. So we see that at lower dB level, at lower SNR, the performance of the digital actually approaches that of the optimal. And for the hybrid, the performance is also constant, just about 30% lower than that of the optimal. And this states the contributions of this work. So we've been able to evaluate performance of our system based on the channel model, Raytheon versus Rayleigh. Also, we also evaluate the angle separation that needs to be between two users before our system starts to fail to recover signals. We also extended the adaptive beamformer to the hybrid and compared the two cases. And we also developed a zero forcing precoder and used the spectral efficiency to evaluate performance. So these are my conclusions. So we have implemented the Raytheon channel model for millimeter wave communication using the N elements ULE. We have applied the adaptive blind equalization algorithm to millimeter wave beamforming in a phase array massive MIMO multi-user system, and we have used the estimate of the channel to perform downlink precoding. And we also conducted performance evaluation for the millimeter wave beamformer system in terms of the SCR, the channel MSC, number of equalized spaces, and spectral efficiency. We've also been able to determine the separation between users, the minimum separation that needs to be between users before the system can equalize signal successfully. And we have compared the performance of our system in the single tap scenario versus a multi-tap scenario, and the single user scenario versus a multi-user scenario. And in order to be practical, also, we extended our beamformer to a hybrid, And at SNR value of 7, we observe that the number of equalized cases from the hybrid beamformer is 35% less than that of the digital beamformer. We compare the two beamformer that has the hybrid beamformer and the digital beamformer are similar ULA size for comparison. So we have also developed a zero forcing downlink precoder, and this is fully developed. And at lower dB, we have observed that the blind adaptive digital beamformer approaches the optimal curve of a system with perfect channel state information. And generally, also across the range of SNR we consider, hybrid beamformer stays consistently about 30% lower than the optimal curve over the entire range of SNR. So these are proposed future work. The performance of the algorithm will be developed and evaluated using the uniform planar array. And also further study areas has opened up in this work, which includes hardware consideration for real-time implementation with FFT on the GPU system and the FPGA system. And the application of this work can also be investigated in terms of issues that can arise with change in multiple characteristics and effect of high-speed mobility, since in the outdoor we are going to have a much higher mobility than in the indoor. So, and this work also can be extended to a distributed network system. These are my publication lists. And these are some of the references also I used in this work. So I want to appreciate and thank my dissertation committee, Dr. Alin Korod, the chair of my dissertation committee, for his good mentorship. And also I want to thank Dr. Moazami for his word of encouragement that kept moving me forward. And I also want to appreciate Dr. Richard Dean for challenging me and also helping me out. And also Dr. Befikado for also encouraging me and also providing me with materials that are very, very helpful. I want to appreciate the School of Graduate Studies for funding this work, and also want to thank all the faculty and students of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering of Morgan State University. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Peter. At this time, I'll open it up to questions from the guests, the general, people who are not on the dissertation committee. If you do have any questions, you can unmute your mic if you would like to speak, if you have any questions for Peter, because then after that, we'll go into a closed session, which will involve just the committee. So are there any questions from guests? Okay. All right.
I have a question. Very good presentation. So what is the societal benefit of this dissertation? How is it going to improve communication, or how the society is going to benefit? How is it pushing forward the frontier of knowledge and technological advancement?
Yeah, so this work is actually part of the larger 5G technologies that's been explored right now. And the benefit of this is that we're going to the millimeter wave spectrum. We have much higher bandwidth where we can run a lot of application that requires higher bandwidth. Like stated at the beginning of this presentation, we're talking about virtual reality and IoT for smart home. So a lot of technology coming up whereby we really need to start building technology that work on the millimeter wave spectrum, which this work is one of them.
Therefore, it's going to solve some of the problems we had during this time of pandemic, the infrastructure for us, Wi-Fi, and many other things.
Yes, so if you think about it, during this time of the pandemic, where even the health workers are so vulnerable, because if they come close to someone that is infected, they can be infected as well. So telemedicine is something that, it has been in the work as well, where the doctor can actually diagnose you remotely. And this requires a large image processing techniques that require large bandwidth. So this kind of system will work well in the millimeter wave spectrum.
Very good. That's very interesting to hear that. I'm really happy for that. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from any of the guests?
Hi, my name is Majid Bello. I just want to say good presentation, and then I said the implementation of this of your dissertation. If you can say that it's a question that how do you want to implement it, or how do you want to use it to support the academy or something? What do you feel like? Maybe like a curriculum or something. Do you want to implement it or something? That's just our neighbor. I just said that's a great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Yes, there are a lot of papers even by so many other researchers, and also I have my papers also out there. And I'm currently working on a journal as well. So, and my dissertation will be public as well.
One last question, please.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is my name is Otili Tusop. Thank you, Peter, for your wonderful presentation. I only have like one question. I just want to know, let's say I'm starting like a company, right? And I want to implement your solution. How much would that cost me? I just want to know the cost of the implementation of your product.
Well, I may not be able to give you an answer about the costs right now, but I mean, it's something we can, list all the elements that should be involved and look for the cost. But I don't have that right now, but I may meet you and discuss that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, Mr. Taiwo, I have a very good question, a political question. You mentioned 5G, and you know what has been the myth that has been going around 5G. They said that the coronavirus started, it was ignited by 5G technology. And there is a country in which they are members of the assembly. They are trying to investigate. For example, if you have called like an expert witness to address that national assembly of that country, how will you be able to disabuse the myth that this is a lie? How will you be able to prove that?
Thank you, Dr. Olabi, for the question. I'm not very good with politics, so yeah, so I try to run away from it. But the explanation I've given earlier on to some people that I normally talk to about this is that this millimeter wave spectrum is actually sitting at the much lower frequency range than light. And I think what people are afraid of is the ultraviolet spectrum, which is higher than the light spectrum. So the spectrum we are sitting with millimeter wave the radiation is not ionizing. So that is the one that can cause problem. So the millimeter wave spectrum, which 5G is using, and 5G is using both millimeter wave and microwave, is not ionizing. So I think it's I think maybe the public just got it wrong or something. I don't know. It's not true that 5G is causing any health problem.
Yeah, thank you.
My opinion. Politically, I will not allow to keep quiet and allow people that are much more like experts than me to convince the public.
Thank you. My last comment is that would it not be better if your topic contains 5G so that people like us from other aspects of engineering will be able to, it's what I just believe, but that's left to your dissertation committee. For example, when you are graduating, they will write the topic of your dissertation, but it will make more meaning and more catchy and more societal need. Sorry for that noise. It will be a more societal catch and need. Maybe just a word of 5G or something 5G can be in your topic. That's my last comment.
Yeah, thank you, sir. My dissertation committee will take decision on that. Thank you so much for the question.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, for your time. And we would like to go into a closed session now with only the dissertation committee members. So thank you, everyone. And if you could log off, we would appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, it looks like everyone's gone. Yes, and it's just the committee. All right. Okay, now for the committee. Do you have questions for Peter? I guess you do. So whoever would like to start,
I do. I have one question. First of all, Peter, thank you so much. This was a very good presentation. The material was good, and also your presentation was very clear, on point, and I really appreciate it.
Just a minute. I think I need to stop recording, right? Let me just stop recording. Yeah.